Bosai, good morning, Shavua Tov. Okay, welcome to the second last panel of the year. We're going to have a panel on Shavuos, but in terms of there'll be more Mitzum that's Rebbe who are going to be here. But for now, Rav Judah said he's running late, but we'll start the panel. Today's panel is about Torah and truth. Okay, so the first question, we're going to start with Rav David and move across, is what motivates you to be a frum Jew? Is there a particular argument or de'ah that kind of like speaks to you? But really, what really motivates you to be a frum Jew?
Good morning, everyone. Thank you. Who said that? Shimmy? Is that you? What motivates me to be a frum Jew? I guess I'll say, since this is a panel about Torah and truth, I'll say that I think that the Torah is true. I think that I am part of a... I think that the Torah is true, and we can talk about exactly what that means. Ad kedei kach, I'll say something a little radical. Okay, like I actually believe that if I was born not Jewish, I would, again, it's hard to know exactly. You have to wind the clock and figure out culturally, but in terms of my predisposition towards being a seeker and having investigated many different things in the world, my thought is, although there's no way for me to really know this, is that I would find Judaism. I think that Judaism is true. I think that there's many things about Judaism that are intuitive. I think that it's the best life to live. I don't think that everyone has to be Jewish, but as a person who's trying to live in a space of ideals, I think that I would probably try to seek it out. So that's in terms of why am I a frum Jew. I don't think it's just, or I hope it's not, just because I was born to a very loving and tender set of parents who raised me, nature and nurture, both gave me the DNA and the predisposition, as well as raised me in a home where I was able to, they never sat me down and said, here's what we are. We are in this particular camp. I don't even know if we had a conversation like we are Jewish. They just lived by example and were nurturing. And so I don't think it's just that. I think that a quest for truth would have led me to Judaism, which is a little bit of a strong thing to say. And in terms of now that I'm fortunate enough to be part of this tradition and I was raised in it, I would say that proofs are not really my thing, like a particular proof that Judaism or that from Judaism, which is a heavily loaded and kind of silly term, but I would say proofs are not really my thing, but the Torah itself, and the Torah is a very large thing. We could talk more about that also, I assume, on this panel, Torah and truth. The Torah itself, I think, for me, is the ultimate proof. My engagement with Torah and the infinite depths and the chemical reaction, or Blau likes to talk about me being a chemist, the chemical reaction of the Torah and my soul screams truth. The Torah itself is a great proof. I think a lot of times people spend a lot of time trying to prove God, whereas just sitting and learning Torah and the edifying nature of what happens when you study Torah, really in any tchum, for me is intuitive. So it's almost like, tamu re'u ki tov Hashem, come and taste that it's good and true, rather than some elaborate proof or something like that.
So, whilst I do agree with Rav David's comments, I would like to just put a little twist on it. And I'd like to divide my answer into two spheres. One is intellectual and one is emotional. On the intellectual sphere, I do believe that Hakadosh Baruch Hu exists, and I believe the Torah is the guideline to our lives. And Mimela, I'm a Jew, and I'm commanded to keep Torah. So why am I from Jew? Because says Rav Saadia Gaon, so I'm committed to Torah because Hakadosh Baruch Hu commands me, so I have to do it to the best of my ability. And if we're talking about intellectual, I will not deny that, Rav David is less into proofs, I will not deny that the argument from design does speak to me a lot. It does. I refuse to believe this whole universe is here by a mistake, by chance. Even the most apicarcious philosopher, scientist has to believe that at some point there was spontaneous generation because some time a slime climbed the shore some billions of years ago. and somehow came to life, and I'd rather choose that it was a Kadosh Baruch Hu. And once you posit a creator, when I say argument for design, if I did not elaborate upon that, I assume everybody knows what I'm referring to. And once you posit a creator, then you posit that the creator created the world for a reason, not because that creator was bored. I actually heard from Orayta Bacher years ago in a conversation. He believed that there's a Kadosh Baruch Hu created the world, but it has nothing to do with it. And so I asked him, why did God create the world? He was bored. And then I don't get that. I'm just being intellectually honest with you, so I just don't think it's a good answer. So I believe that once you posit a creator, then HaKadosh Baruch Hu cares about the world, and if he cares about the world, then he gave us a guide rule. And that's the Torah. So if I am convinced that HaKadosh Baruch Hu exists, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives the Torah, ergo I'm committed. And you call that, if you wish, an intellectual argument. On the emotional side, I will be honest with you. One of the questions that the guys, I'm sure someone has asked this year because it's a sort of a common question. The guys will sometimes ask, "No, what happens if I prove to you b'moftim b'otot, through miracles, that Kadosh Baruch Hu doesn't exist? Would you still lead a frum life?" That's a classic question. And I don't need. Of course, that's a ridiculous question because it's built of shari. But yes, because I honestly believe that living a frum life. The Torah tells us that if you lead a Torah life, it'll be good for you. I honestly believe that living this life makes us better people. To the best of our abilities, of course, it's important to note, there's no magic. It's just because you keep Torah mitzvahs to grow a beard, all of a sudden you're a better person. No, that's a whole discussion. Maybe we'll get to later on as well on this panel. You have to put effort into it. But yes, I do think that it enables me to be, to the best of my ability, a better husband, a better father, a better chaver. Through whatever means. Through Talmud Torah, through keeping mitzvot, mitzvot ben al chaviro, as well as ben al makom, to be sure. It gives me purpose. The most important thing that we need in life is purpose. Otherwise, life is just an accident. No, life is just a mistake. And the world is cruel and makes no sense. And I've said to our boys several times, I don't understand. How could you possibly sleep into 1 o'clock in the afternoon? I can't imagine anybody here has ever done such a thing. You have nothing in the morning to get up for? That's crazy. There's got to be something to get up for, to give meaning and purpose to your life. Yiddishkeit gives me meaning and purpose to my life.
So I'm going to divide into 2 categories to actually integrate. Okay, one category would be arguments why one believes. And then there's a whole host. I'm not going to evaluate their quality now. I'd say, the cosmological argument, the theological argument from mass revelation, argument from the survival of the Jewish people, argument from religious experience, right? That is all one category. And then there's what Rav Noam was alluding to, which is the wisdom and meaningfulness that a religious lifestyle gives you. Just to point out a couple of things, I think, Shabbos is probably one of the 3 greatest ideas in history. It's a pretty amazing thing. The focus on family meals. I was just talking to somebody the other day about this. And just so you guys know, I am not anti-Christian. But let's say you're a serious Christian. How many family meals are you forced to have a year? I believe the answer is 2. Right, Christmas and Thanksgiving. I don't think they have a family meal for Easter. So I said to him, that's pretty fascinating. That means that every weekend we have as many family meals as the Christians have all year. That's a pretty impressive thing and a good realization on our part. So you might say, but the two have nothing to do with each other, because the first category was arguments about truth, and the second category is arguments about goodness and meaningfulness, but they're connected. Let's say someone didn't find Judaism good or meaningful. It becomes quite hard to argue it comes from omniscient and benevolent God. And if to the degree that one finds it more wise and more meaningful, then it becomes easier to believe that it comes from a divine source. So even though I would say there are 2 categories, at the end of the day, they do integrate into one.
Thank you. I'm just going to use the moderator's prerogative, as Lau often says, to offer just one opinion in the name of Rebbe Aaron that I think is important if you guys haven't heard it yet this year, about not equating so much the idea of truth or proof with understanding your relationship with the Kadosh Baruch Hu, right? Where Rabbi Aaron has said sometimes you can be on like a Shabbaton. I think it was Rav Davidel or Rav Noam who quote, proving that Hashem exists, and someone who did not believe in HaKadosh Baruch Hu beforehand, now you have proved to them logically Hashem exists, that Torah exists, Torah means Shemayim and everything, and you might have done them a great disservice by making them firm, Rabbi Aaron says. Because maybe they have, as so many people do in today's world, have baggage against HaKadosh Baruch Hu because of the way that we understand what HaKadosh Baruch Hu is. And you haven't shown any beauty, you haven't shown any relationship, as Rav David was talking about the tenderness and the beauty of the family that he grew up in. And if you just focus on proof, then that can be actually quite a negative or a self-defeating idea. Just wanted to throw that out. Okay, the next question is very open for interpretation, and so I'm going to leave it to the individual panelists to interpret the question as they see fit. It can go in lots of different ways. I find it interesting to see where they'll take it. And the next question is there truth outside of Torah? Okay, so now we're going to go the opposite way. We're going to start with Rav Blau again and move across.
Okay, so here I'm going to be very one-sided. Of course there is. Like, what kind of question is that? Just look at the world around you. Look at the progress modern science has made, right? Is that an accident? Or is it because they're able to access the truth through experimentation and the like? Just to give, there are 1,000 examples. To give one, okay, our son at one point had brain surgery to remove a growth. Thankfully, it was not malignant. So basically, what did the doctors do? They basically took out his skull. Here's the way I envision it. The doctor says to the nurse, why don't you hold this for a little bit? I'll need it in an hour, right? Then they took out what they need to take out and they put it back in, right? That's incredible that we're able to do that. And that's because human beings have acquired knowledge through empirical evidence and the like. Science is the easiest example, but I wouldn't limit to science. Let's say we want to figure out how to deal with the elderly, which is a bigger issue because thank God people live longer. So as I've told you guys, the book with the most wisdom and sensitivity is a book by a man named Atul Gawande called Being Mortal. Right? You read that book and say, oh my God, this is how we should treat the elderly. Right? This is a good strategy for their final years. I see wisdom there all the time. Okay, moving a little bit further, we're heading from science towards the humanities as the trajectory goes on. Right? You read a poem by Wordsworth about the benefits of structure and limitation. Those want to look it up. It's called Nuns Fret Not, about how nuns are okay being trapped in their little covenant over there. Okay, so again, you say, oh my God, I've been thinking my whole life that all of restrictions and limitations are problematic. And I realized they actually could encourage creative expression. So I just every day encounter wisdom in the larger world of people who are not necessarily within the Torah rubric. So for me, this is a no-brainer, this question.
Noam.
I of course agree with Reb Lau. I just want to just tweak it a little bit. The Gemara recognizes. The Gemara says not emet b'chochma. The Gemara says the goyim have chochma, and I think that's certainly what Reb Lau was referring to. And the Rambam famously wrote kabbalat emet mimisham ra, receive the truth from whoever said it. Even that person might have been a Greek philosopher. So there is emet outside Yiddishkeit. Having said that, I would like to say that I believe, and I'll focus on the humanities here, that you need the Torah as well. An example that I will provide is that Rav Zichas and Rav Mital both wrote extensively about Musar TV, about natural morality. The natural morality is instilled in each and every one of us as a human being because we are born human beings. Even without the Torah, and the Gemara gives me examples as well, of course, I would have known not to murder. I don't need the Torah to say Lord Tirtzach. I say this, by the way, because I actually did see a well-known Rav write years ago. I was shocked. The only reason why we don't murder is because Torah says Lord Tirtzach. I was like, what? That's the only reason, because there's nothing innate in human morality that would tell me Lord Tirtzach. I need it. There is Chumam Musar TV. And that Musar TV then begins with us as human beings. Every single human being. Whether you're Jewish or not Jewish. That does not come from the Torah. The Torah then builds upon it. Rav Kook speaks about this a lot. Rav Kook then, the Torah builds upon that Musar TV and extends it further. But that begins not with the Torah command. It begins with who we are as human beings. Again, as I mentioned, designate to every human being, be that person Jewish or non-Jewish. So is there emet amongst the goyim? Is there behavioral patterns that we can learn? Are there things we can learn? I absolutely think so. I say that you realize that it needs to be developed through Torah. I would not remain. I mean, the example of science, of course, Rebbe mentioned earlier. It's not as if a neurological surgeon that needs to look in the Rambam to say, okay, what's my next move, right? But in certain areas, I believe in the ethics and morality. I think that you build upon something innate, and the Torah then even raises it to higher levels. I think Torah, together with that, with this emet, with these morals and ethics that grow out of human beings who they are, that is the way to go, to combine the two together.
Okay, well, just for fun, I guess I'll start by answering, is there truth in the Torah? I already answered that I think the Torah is true, and there is truth in the Torah. I guess what I would say before answering the second part of the question, is there truth outside of the Torah, is that there are many Maimrei Chazal, and I think that I belong to a certain tradition that would lean in this direction. There are many Maimrei Chazal that say many things. In addition to the fact that, as Rav Noam pointed out, Rav Blau's example, we're more chachma b'goyim. There's a lot of wisdom, but there is also the statement of the Rambam, mikablas emes, from whoever says it, and mipneishu emes, because it is truth. So obviously, the Rambam thought there was truth outside of the Torah. There's a Maimar Chazal that says that the Torah that we have in the Aron Kodesh is novlos chachma. It is underdeveloped or unripe chachma. Novlos is, we speak about novlos in the realm of agriculture. It means like a fruit that hasn't quite yet reached its prime. It has all the qualities of that fruit, but it hasn't yet quite reached its prime. And there are many extractions upon that Maimar Chazal that indicate, and I'm going to use the technical language here, even though I'm going to lose you for half a second, but I'll bring you back, that the Torah that we have in the Aron Kodesh is called the Torah of the world of Bria. Meaning to say, we have a certain manifestation of the divine mind. The Torah is the mind of Hashem. It's what Hashem thinks about everything, as manifest through the history of the Jewish people and the way that Hashem transmitted that to Moshe Rabbeinu, with aspaklarim, with perfect prophecy that a human being could get. But the Torah that we have in here is a mashal of a mashal of a mashal of God's mind. Meaning to say that the Torah is the closest approximation to truth appropriate for human beings. You could think to the Maimar Chazal that talks about Moshe Rabbeinu going to get the Torah. The Malachim are like, we don't want to give it to you. You're just a human being. What have you been doing here? And Moshe says, no. Do you have parents? Were you slaves in Egypt? Do you have Yetzer Hara? And the Malachim are like, oh, that's what you want? Oh, yeah, that's fine. You could have it's not exactly Cliff Notes, but you could have the mashal, the version of the Torah, which is appropriate for human beings. And we have a promise that Torah, lo tiyeh muchlefes, that is the Torah. It's not like we're waiting to get the higher Torah in some way. It's that Torah. And I would even say that within the mashal is the nimshal. It's there. But to say, is there truth in the Torah? The answer is yes, there's truth in the Torah. The question is, do you have access to it? Do I have access to it? Do any of us as individuals have access to it? Do even all of the Jewish people together have access to the capital T truth of the Torah? I think not. I think that we have access to this thing that has the capital T truth in it, and that's a great thing. I'd rather have that than nothing. So now, if you start from that premise, and then you work outwards, and you say, is there truth outside of the Torah? I would say, yes, there is also truth outside of the Torah. But it's something like, imagine kind of like a Venn diagram where you have these two overlapping circles where there's a little bit of truth, that is, one of them is the Venn diagram is all the way this way, is a lot of truth, but there's the possibility, because we're human beings and we're receiving the Torah through the lens of humanity, so there's a little bit of what I'll call tov v'ra that's mixed into the Torah. If you want to go back to the story of Bereshit, so you have the two trees, you have the Eitz Hadas, tov v'ra, which is das, is wisdom, like Rav Blau was saying, is knowledge, is wisdom, and then you have the Eitz HaChaim, which is the tree of truth. We didn't actually taste that tree of truth, and what we have is an admixture of tov v'ra, plus access to this thing that's the Torah, where we can analyze it and try to get to the truth. And then there's the wisdom of the world, which is basically kulo tov v'ra. It's like an admixture of human rationality and human drive towards what I want the world to look like and what I'm trying to make my own meaning out of the world. But it's deeply influenced, because the Jewish people have done a pretty decent job, and because God wants the whole world to have access to what he thinks about things, that we've influenced the globe pretty significantly, I would say, over the past several thousand years, in such a way that the Torah exists sort of also within that which is outside of the Torah. There's this. So that's what it's. I know it's a little bit of a complicated answer, but what I would say is, to the degree that there is access to truth in this world, which there is to some degree, there is a preponderance of the truth that is contained within the wisdom of the Torah, and there is access to truth outside of the Torah also because there's an interplay between those two things. That's awesome.
It's very good, but no chemistry references.
I did the first thing chemistry.
Okay, I want to set up the next question. In America, this concept of what we call nowadays Native Americans, right? But the truth is, if you look at Europe and the Middle East, almost every country has this idea of interlopers coming and have taken over those countries. Virtually everyone. Right? I remember a couple of years ago there was going to be a remake of the movie Cleopatra, starring Gal Gadot. A very famous movie by Elizabeth Taylor in the 1950s, 60s, and they were going to remake it. Gal Gadot was going to be Cleopatra, and there was, I don't know if any of you saw it, there's a big outcry. How could it not be an Arabic actress? How could it be an Israeli actress who's playing Cleopatra? And all of these social justice warriors missed out on the fact that Cleopatra was not Arab. She was Greek. Right? The ancient Egyptians, people who live in Egypt are not the ancient Egyptians. People who live in Greece nowadays are not the ancient Greeks. People who live in so many of the countries of Europe are not the real indigenous people. But Baruch Hashem, that's one of the great miracles of all time. We're mamash indigenous here. We are the people of the land. And it has mamash been an amazing, amazing miracle, not only that we've come back, but that we've survived. Think about all of the nations that exist in the Torah. Where are the Canaanim? Where are the Plishtim? Where are the Romans? As Rabini would love to say. So the next question is the miraculous survival of the Jewish people a legitimate argument for faith? Okay, so we'll go with Rav Noam, then Rav Davidel, and then Rav Blatt.
I'd like to, first of all, let's begin with Rav Moshe ended with. With all those quotes, and you guys like to laugh about it, where's the Romans, where's this, where's that? Bezrat Hashem, soon we'll be able to say where's Hamas. But people like to laugh about it, but don't laugh about it. It's a nachon. It's a nachon. It's not. It's like it's a nachon. And there's a deep premise there. So now you got to realize that. I'd like to answer not with a Jewish answer, but with two Goyish answers. It's brought down. It's a famous anecdote. I've heard it many times. That Louis XIV once asked Pascal, "Could you please bring me proof of divine existence? Proof for faith." And he answered, supposedly, I wasn't there at the time, but it's a very famous anecdote. He supposedly answered 4 words: "The Jews, Your Majesty." He understood that if the Jewish people exist and survived and had such an influence over the world, despite everything, and we're talking about hundreds of years ago, which is not, this is, forget about the Holocaust and everything that came since then. But if the Jewish people survived everything, and the influence was such a manner, that's got to be divine. It just, otherwise it makes no sense. But I'd like to read to you something else. And again, this is a very, very famous passage. Very famous passage, and whoever recognizes it, you can yell out who wrote it. The Egyptian, the Babylonian, and the Persian rose, filled the planet with sound and splendor, then faded to dreams. Shall I continue? There you go. The Greek and the Roman followed and made a vast noise, and they are gone. Other peoples have sprung up and held their torch high for a time, but it burnt out, and they sit in twilight and now are vanished. The Jews saw them all, beat them all, and is now what he always was, exhibiting no decadence, no infirmities of age, no weakening of his parts, no slowing of his energies, no dulling of his alert and aggressive mind. All things are mortal but the Jew. All other forces pass, but he remains. What is the secret of his immortality? So, the Goyim understood it, and I think we know what the answer to that question is. What is the secret to the Jews' immortality? It's HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Honestly, I'd be a fool to deny that, honestly. Yes, it brings challenges, commitment and Torah, and everything that entails nachon. But you'd be a fool. These are non-Jews who recognize this. Kavachomer, that you understand and appreciate that when the Torah tells you that this and this is going to pass, the Ramban going to say, Parashat Hazinu, the Ramban writes that if the Torah was written by some astrologer, I would have said, oh, she's got it right, because everything the Torah promised happens. The Ramban Kedai, I spoke to Shana Betz about this this morning. But the Ramban reads the Chumash, our most unique, I think, amongst commentaries, he said, referring to specific events. And he says, everything the Torah said happening. So the Torah says we're going to go to exile, the Torah is going to come back. No, that's what's happening. We're privileged to live in such an age. To say that this is a mistake, a fluke, a chance, I don't know. If Pascal and Mark Twain understood it, I think we can understand it. Of course, it brings challenges. Participating in the Geula, being like Torah mitzvahs, but to me, it's a passion. I don't even understand the question.
So I guess I'll say yes. I think that the Jewish people, I love that story. The Jews, Your Majesty. I guess I'll use the question, because it is a davar pashut. The Jewish people are quite remarkable. Again, it's like, yeah, that's nice, it's good. The Jews are a remarkable people. Proofs, they just don't hit me in the stomach that way. But I guess I'll use the question as an opportunity to say that the question, what is the secret of their immortality? So the answer is HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but the answer is also the Torah, and I'll explain what I mean. There's a Maharal. The Maharal asks the question, I think I've shared it with some of you in different contexts. The Maharal asks the question, why did Hashem not give the Torah to Avram Avinu? Now, maybe you'll counter and you'll say, well, the Medrash says that Avram Avinu kept the Torah, there was a natural morality, his kidneys taught him Torah, he sort of intuited the major claims of the Torah and lived on some level in accordance with the Torah, depending on how you look at that. You either think that he was actually eating matzah and sitting in a sukkah, or you just think he was living sort of like based on the klalim of the Torah without the pratim yet. But I would say, the Maharal asks, why didn't Hashem give the actual Torah, like the Torah this one again, why didn't Hashem give the Torah to Avram Avinu? And the Maharal says, because Avram Avinu is an individual. Avram is a person. And the Torah is nitzchi, and Avram is not nitzchi. The concept of Avram is somewhat nitzchi. Avram, we keep him in our consciousness as a nitzchi thing, but Avram Avinu, the individual, is not nitzchi. And so Avram Avinu one day is going to die, and the Torah, which is nitzchi, needs to be given to something which is nitzchi. And therefore the Maharal says Hashem waited until the Jewish people formed in earnest. It happened in the cauldron of Egypt, that we were formed into a nation. And once there was a nation, the nation of the Jewish people is eternal. Meaning to say, and I'll sort of like turn the question, like the fact that the Jewish people is an eternal people, and the Jews, Your Majesty, and that story is gewaldic. And Hashem will make good on his promise that the Jewish people are an eternal nation, for sure. But each and every individual, including David Weinberg, doesn't have any guarantee that you're part of that story forever. I mean, like, you as an individual can't sit there and be like, I'm the chosen person. You're not the chosen person. You're given an opportunity to be part of the chosen nation, but you're not the chosen person. You're part of a chosen nation, and to the degree that you upkeep the bilateral agreement that was signed into and ratified at Har Sinai and Parshas Yisro and Parshas Mishpatim, so then you're part of that, conglomerate entity, no matter what happens to you. And so that exists forever. So I'm taking the question a little bit in a different direction, but that's my 2 cents.
Okay. Just before we hand it over to Rav Blau, Rav Judah has arrived. So Baruch Hashem, I think everyone would benefit from having him part of the conversation. So while he comes in, just to remind him, if you heard the question, is the miraculous survival of the Jewish people a legitimate argument for faith? All right. So we're going to head to Rav Blau and then to Rav Judah.
Before I start, I want to give a lot of credit to Rav Noam. While he was talking, I was thinking Louis XIV was later than Pascal, but I looked it up and he was totally right. He knows his French history. I think in terms of the argument, one of the things we have to realize is that in modernity, we have arguments that give support. It's hard to have a real knockdown argument that closes the question. The philosopher Robert Nozick expressed his frustration by having the following fantasy. Like after having philosophical debates in the academic world for years. He said, I fantasize about, I say an argument that's so good that my opponent perishes. Because that's not the way arguments work. Like, it's not like that. Okay, so I would say it is a helpful argument, but I don't think any single argument should be held up as, oh, this is the one that closes the conversation. As I alluded to before, I think it's a number of arguments that help us come at conclusions, usually not one killer argument. Okay, I think it is helpful, and I think on 3 levels. Okay, one, even before we came back to Israel, which is amazing, as Rav Noam was saying, just the mere survival of the Jewish people is pretty incredible, right? To be in exile and persecuted for 2,000 years and still make it through that, that's pretty amazing. Obviously, returning to your homeland after that period, after 2 millennia, is really an incredible story. And I'll just throw in, just because I get more interested in language, resuscitating a almost dead language after 2,000 years is a pretty incredible story. Like ask the Egyptians how it's going with Coptic, or the Irish how it's going with Gaelic, right? This is something really incredible. So whether or not we think this is the argument for Judaism, I think we should all be very inspired about the miraculous return to the land of Israel.
So, I think I'm going to try to put together 2 different questions into one just to catch up a little bit, which is I don't know where other panelists stood on this, but I'm in the same camp as Rav Blau in terms of I simply don't believe there is anything that can be offered that is one killer argument for anything. That's more of a post-Kantian concern about how I really know anything in the first place in epistemology. But as a result, there isn't any one argument that for me is like, that's why I'm from, that's why this is true, or how I would even know that there is such a thing as anything that is absolutely true. I'm just working with that as a premise. As a result, when I get to the question like, what do I make of the miraculous survival of the Jewish history of the Jewish people through history? For me, that's a part of a group of arguments. If you think in terms of, let's say, big data, right? They'll mine through massive quantities of information, and no one bit is going to be necessarily the indicator of whatever it is that the data scientists are looking for. But rather, when you put together the aggregate of a tremendous amount of information, you get a direction that this is where whatever it is that you're looking for is going. So I tend to think of it in the same way, which is that all the various rational arguments that are offered for God, Torah, etc., they're meaningful. I don't have necessarily any specific knockdown or qualm with them. They just don't do it all the way. And then you have the intuitive arguments, or the pieces that come from many different bits of information. So those bits of information could be bits of information in my own life that I've been through so many experiences that indeed, statistically speaking, it could be that was just another freak chance that happened to go my way, or happened to go in a particular direction. But when I aggregate them and say, well, I have actually so many different things have happened, each one of them explainable, but in aggregate they amount to quite a bit. Then you do the same thing, not on the personal level, but on the Jewish history level, and say, okay, is it possible that, out of so many different peoples on the planet, it's going to happen that somebody's going to get lucky? And thank God that was us. And so all these different twists and turns in history are going to lead us to this point, this point, this point. It happens to be we got through the obstacle course in a way that nobody else did. It's possible. It just doesn't seem to me likely. And then if you put together now, you have a series of rational arguments with a series of arguments by aggregated small bits of indication, no one of which will do it on its own, but together amount to something substantial, then throw on top of that a very pragmatic aspect, which is just going back to the earlier question, of, let's imagine for a second it's wrong. It's still a really, really brilliant and good life. If I was to sit there and try to figure out what kind of life I would want in my ism, right, I'm going to make my own religion and my own life creed. So the features that I'm going to find in a Jewish life speak to me very much, because I would want a life that encourages questioning. I want a life that encourages discipline. I want a life that encourages let's say, awareness of my experiences. I want a life that encourages family life, and so on and so forth. So you put together these factors and say, all right, so now I have in front of me something that hits my major markers on a pragmatic level of what I'm looking for in a life. It works for me rationally, even though I have a decent level of suspicion about how far rationalism can actually take me. It works in aggregate as a people and individually for where what has happened, to say, wow, that's possible that it just happened in an exceedingly unlikely manner, but I'm going to guess that this actually comes from something divine, some sort of hand that is pushing this along. That's enough for me, because I don't actually think I'm going to get anything even close to that elsewhere.
Okay, thank you. Before we go on to the next question, I just want to take a second to just kind of like marvel at what we've heard so far. Right? We have heard, and the type of yeshiva, the type of limud, the type of hashkafa you guys have been blessed to get this last year, and for some of you here 2 years, we've had quoted Kant, Robert Nozick, Pascal, Mark Twain, by 4 panelists, 4 Rebbeim, who spend their lives learning and teaching Torah. And how amazing that is. Just want to throw that out. The next question can be answered on many levels, and each of our panelists, please feel free to do so. Again, we're going to be going from Rav Judah across to Rav Blau. Is it possible to believe in ethics or have an ethical life if you don't believe Torah is true? So there are ways of kind of like someone could, what does it mean to have an ethical life, right? But also, I urge the panelists to talk about it maybe on an individual level, as a person who themselves, about living their life, but also on a community, society level. Is that possible? Is it possible maybe for individuals, but is it more difficult for maybe a society? And also, if you could take not only kind of like the immediate, but also the long term, especially on the society level. If a society doesn't live in Torah, it doesn't believe in Torah, it doesn't believe in the ideals of Torah, can it exist not only for a short time, but can it pass the test of time? Rav Judah first, please.
So I'm going to go with, in theory, yes. In practice, very, very difficult. And what I mean by that is, I am a believer in natural morality, and that there is a certain something within a human being. You can go to, if we're going to add philosophers, we can add John Locke. But so there's a certain aspect within a human being that is aware, at least on a societal level, that I wouldn't want to be treated like this, and most people don't want to be treated like this, so I can assume that that is something that is an inappropriate way to treat someone else. And so there's a layer of ethics that is, I think, innate within a person, and a voice that says, this is not okay, this is okay. Now, the problem with that is that we have a conflicting voice that speaks very, very loudly, which is selfishness and temptation. In other words, if you've ever played the IU hymn game, it's like where you describe a certain behavior in terms of yourself, in terms of somebody else, in terms of the third party. So I am strong-willed, you are stubborn, that guy is pig-headed. I'm careful with my money, you're tight-fisted, he's downright stingy. Because depending who we're talking about, so it will be much harsher about the third party than it would about you, and much easier on myself. So see, this is not actually fraud. They overcharge us to count for this. I'm just getting back some of my own. No, that's actually fraud. And if you find yourself saying something to someone else that you could tell yourself, this is really okay. I'm not actually hurting anyone else. I'm not taking advantage of anyone else. And then if you said it to somebody else, your friend would look at you and go, what are you talking about? This is wrong. But that's the way human beings are. And so can there be an ethic and a morality outside of Torah? I think there very much can be, and a person can live an ethical life. It requires tremendous discipline and an exceeding level of self-honesty about what's going on here, and am I being diverted by temptations, et cetera, et cetera. It gets all the harder, to just address Rav Moshe's latter aspect. It's much, much harder when you live in society, because one-to-one, we're much more likely to be ethical and moral when I'm dealing with a human being into whose eyes I look and I say, wow, what's this going to be for you? Right? As I raced in here just now as fast as I could by foot, and I stopped for a second. I tried to make it my maximum time, but I was slightly under, because there was a woman with her hand out asking for money. And I'm telling myself, look, I gotta go. And then I'm like, wait a second. Like, I looked in her eyes. There's a human being there, and she's clearly in need. So I stopped for a second. So I was that many seconds later, I tried to be here as fast as I could. But the point is that when you look in someone's eyes, there's a feeling there of like, okay, well, here's a human being. The minute that you function as a society, it gets all the harder because societies don't have natural morality. A community at large is something put together by a group of people. It doesn't have a consciousness. And so the prospects of having lower levels of ourselves, right, lesser, baser aspects take over and push in the direction of, well, what's good for us, right? The other now becomes faceless. They're not a human being anymore. I think it gets all the harder. So can there be an ethical life without a code or some sort of allegiance to something higher? Yeah, there totally can be. But I think it's really, really hard if you don't believe or at least act in a manner that subscribes to the idea that I am beholden to something above me. It's really, really hard to hang on to that.
Beautiful. I very much enjoyed that answer. Rav Judah, which I think, I'm not sure I could say it as eloquently, but I think that there wasn't anything that struck me as not something that I would agree with. Rav Judah focused more on the sort of individual versus the klal, which Rav Maish sort of invited us to do. I think I'm going to zoom in on the granular, versus the general. Is there ethics outside of the Torah? Can a person create an ethical framework for living? Certainly in the year 2025 or Tafshin Pehei, as you wish. I think yes, we have the tools to do that because we have these systems of law that give you a general framework. Rav Soloveitchik has a beautiful essay, a very nicely written essay about, I think it's called The Common Sense Rebellion. And in there he gives an example, he quotes from Dostoevsky. There we go, we're adding to our, but it's Rav Soloveitchik. He discusses the famous Dostoevsky story of a young man killing a stingy old woman who is holding on to all this money that she doesn't need anyway because he has a sister who's about to get into a love affair with someone who he doesn't think is good for her, v'chulu, v'chulu. So what he basically says there is that, I think Rav Blau actually mentioned it before, everybody agrees or can intuit that murder is wrong, except when you get to the granular, very extenuating circumstances where you have to figure out whether, this child is actually considered a human being, and it's kind of grating on the mother's, plans to, even just to be able to take care of herself, let's say that, and then, she has a business plan that she's trying to work out. Or, she has hopes of making partner. There's various different levels of that. As you move to more and more granular case, law, so you need, that's why people get very frustrated with the Gemara and with Judaism's, nitpicky, hair-splitting Talmudic discussion in general, but in fact, that's actually what gives it the kiyum to be able to go into these insane cases where you get so many details, and yet the Torah has, or we have as the Jewish people, worked out a basic framework, not even just a basic framework, but a very nitty-gritty framework for whether this is permissible or not permissible. Now, that doesn't mean that there isn't machlokes, but even where there's machlokes, there's a system for dealing with that machlokes. And so if you sort of take the public policy argument that Rav Judah was a little bit pushing towards, which is as you move towards public policy, mob mentality takes over, how do you exactly create an ethic in the realm of the larger public policy? So the answer is, if there is a mishpat echad l'kulam, if there is a one law for everybody, which again, like I said, in 2025, there are systems of law that are heavily based on Judeo-Christian ethic and Western values that have been borrowed from the Torah. So you see a remarkable thing. I'll just add one more thing. There's an amazing book, and the title is escaping me right now. It was written by the chief rabbi of South Africa, I think. Yeah, do you remember what the book's called? It's a big, bright green book. It's based on his PhD. Well, I was going to find the first right now. It's based on his PhD that he wrote. And in there, I think he takes 4 or 5 different topics and shows how up until the late mid-1900s, like 60s, 70s, there were, he focuses on, number one, the human spirit. What's it called? Defending the human spirit. That's exactly what it is. The prohibition of collecting charity in public. Judah's mentioned before. In America, in England, it was considered illegal to receive charitable funds in public. He speaks about marital rape and how up until the 1970s, marital rape was permissible, whereas the Torah prohibits marital rape going back thousands of years. He talks about incarceration and talks about self-incrimination. He talks about all these things. It's a really wonderful book, and he brings the receipts from Torah, from the U.S. constitutional law, and from South African law, which is a combination of like British common law and something else. And he really brings the receipts to go through each of these. It's an amazing book. It's like really expensive. It's like $75 on Amazon. But to just see that the Torah has these public policy issues worked out to the T in such a remarkable way that when Rav Soloveitchik makes this beautiful pitch to say, like, yes, everyone agrees murder is wrong, but what happens when you get into this very specific, detailed case? The Torah has a method for that too.
Well, I agree. I'd like to sharpen both my colleagues' points. I agree with them both. But I'd like to sharpen the point. Rav Judah spoke about the individual versus a more community. I'd like to speak about past individual who might be behaving in a particular ethical manner. Can he pass it downwards farther? Not necessarily in the community. Can it be retained and passed on? In essence, we're talking about here, can reason in its own right create an ethical system or create an ethical human being? And many philosophers have debated that. We can have a whole discussion of philosophy. Can reason alone? And the answer is that no, it just can't. Maybe, as Rav Judah did point out, yes, for an individual here and there, it's a nachon. But down the line, no. And the reason for that is because, and the word I think when you were speaking, Rav Judah, the word that struck me is rationalize. I think it's the word you were referring to, rather, because it's a davar yadua. People steal from hotel rooms all over the world. They're good people. If you say to the guy, "Are you a thief?" "I'm not a thief. I paid a lot of money, so I come on. That towel's mine. Come on, I'm not gonna walk out with that. Come on, I paid for that towel, right?" People, unfortunately, the adua cheat on their taxes. Well, the government makes so much money anyway, and everybody's doing it. That's what people say. That's rationalization. If you leave it up to reason, it's not going to create, b'safo shel davar, a consistent, ethical society. As I tweak it, not just a question of society, but can it be passed on? Because it's got to be something based upon something which is based upon revelation, based on something which is absolute, which is moral, and that is ethical monotheism. Ethical monotheism means there's one Kadosh Baruch Hu, and because there's one Kadosh Baruch Hu, there's one way, there's absolute right and absolute wrong, and certain things are wrong objectively. I don't care what your reasoning is. And that leads me to Rav Double, because I was going to quote Dostoevsky, you beat me to it. I'm not familiar with Rav Soloveitchik, show me after the Rav Soloveitchik article. But it's well known, it's quoted, and for those of you who have read the Brothers Karamazov, that Dostoevsky said that if God doesn't exist, then everything's permitted. Now, if you read the book, it doesn't actually say those words. But that's certainly the gist of it. And he made the famous argument, if God doesn't exist, nothing is permitted. Everything's permitted. Why? Because there's no absolute right or wrong. Again, go back to reason. The Nazis, I don't have to tell you what horrific things they did. If Kadosh Baruch Hu doesn't exist, what can you say about it? In their world, it was by law. There was reason to this. They thought they were doing the world a taiva. It was enshrined in law. What can you say about it? You don't feel comfortable, you're not happy with it. You can't say more than that. And that's why ultimately, is reason critical? Of course reason is critical. Reason and religion need to go hand in hand. That goes without saying. If you don't have reason, you get up with religious fanatics, be they Muslim or Jewish. And we know that that's happened. We have Jewish fanatics as well. You have to have reason with religion. They need to go hand in hand. But reason alone, you end up with Nazism. You end up Bolshevism. Because you can reason, you can explain. Again, I agree with Rav Judah, certainly. Certain individuals, of course, can be other. I'm sure all of us have met people who are not religious or wonderful people. Zebarur ligamer. I think we can all know. And I can right now. I'm not even trying hard. And I can think of all the wonderful people I met who are not religious, and I know well. But can it be sustained down the line? We're just speaking about a community. I'm talking about transferring it to the next generation. I don't think so. I think Dostoevsky is right. If you don't believe in Kadosh Baruch Hu, if you don't believe in ethical monotheism, if you don't have an absolute standard of something which right or wrong, it won't last.
Wow. Okay, I'm not going to be very lengthy because many of you know I just participated in a debate relevant to this topic, which is available online. And I have an article called Ivan Karamazov Revisited. You could read that article too. But nonetheless, a few brief comments. First of all, just to back up Rav Judah, Reinhold Niebuhr, a 20th century Christian theologian, has a book called Moral Man and Immoral Society, which I think the title speaks for itself. Secondly, I think it's very interesting how in arguments for Judaism today, people love to say that without God, there's no such thing as ethics. I find fascinating because almost none of the Rishonim thought that. I mean, if you look at the Ramban on the Mabul, the Ramban says, why are they punished for Hamas? Because you should know Hamas is wrong, whether or not you heard it from a Navi. You just know Hamas is wrong, right? If you look at Rav Sadia Gaon, and Rav Sadia Gaon says, why should you follow the Torah? He says, because you're grateful for God for creating and sustaining you. But that means that gratitude precedes the command. So that's the majority position we showed him, that there are these objective ethical values irrespective of a specific divine command. Okay, now I'm going to do something a little bit unusual to spice things up. I totally agree with my colleagues that there are many advantages to a religious worldview to create an ethical personality. But I'm going to say, like most things in life, there actually could be dangers as well. Okay, I mentioned two ways that religion can harm ethics. One is, let's say someone in a halachic system reduces obligations to what's explicitly halachic, right? But I think the whole halachic, and again, this is not the way the system is meant to be practiced. We have things like don't be a novel b'shut haTorah, right? Don't be a scoundrel with the Torah's permission. Emulate God and go beyond. But not everybody always gets that message. So my first danger to be aware of is do not reduce ethical responsibility to what you could find in a shach, what's explicitly in halacha. There are ethical responsibilities beyond that. My second danger is the Torah commands certain things that are quite harsh, and I would view them as aberrations, exceptions. But religious zealot could take them as models. So let's say we have a command to obliterate Amalek. So in my mind, that is a unique aberration that is not reflective of the Jewish spirit. But there could be, some aggressive Jews out there who say, oh, Amalek is a model for behavior in other contexts as well. So I think it's important in terms of the complexities of life. We could view religion as a major advantage, but that doesn't mean there aren't dangers to be aware of also.
Okay, I don't think we have time for a final question. Baruch Hashem, we do want to have morning seder. So I'll share the question with everyone, and you're all invited at certain times during the day or during the week to ask the panelist or any of the other Rebbeim to offer their views. And the question was, name a negative idea or institution in Western culture, and name also the same positive idea or institution in Western culture. So that's for anyone who wants to share that afterwards. I want to thank my colleagues and the distinguished panelists And again, marvel at Baruch Hashem, the yeshiva that we have, that when they agree with each other, they agree with each other so many different nuances and different ideas that they bring to the table. And when they disagree with each other, it's done with such kavod and with such derech eretz. So everyone, I think that in and of itself is as much as what they said in the way that they say, in the way that they act, is just as important as the panel that we heard this morning. And let's have a wonderful rest of morning seder.
You're a nice.